Good evening. My name is Jim Fott. I'm your neutral third-party facilitator for tonight. I'm from Lura Consulting. And the agenda for tonight is different than the standard CENAC meetings. We're going to have some opening remarks following my introductory comments. And then the bulk of the meeting will be for the presentation of the Noise Management Benchmarking and Best Practices Study by Helios. That will be introduced shortly. There will be a full time for question and answers, and we'll have roving mics when we get to that period. It really is a few housekeeping items for us that the meeting is being live streamed from the back, and it's being focused on the front. So the back of your head we'll see in the live streaming. We're finding that more and more meetings live streaming is important so that we can reach out to the community through different means so they can be able to attend the meeting without actually attending the meeting itself. Is that me doing that? So the cameras are diverted away from your. There's no cameras at the front. One camera at the back that's pointed right at the podium and for the panel for the question and answer period. If you have questions after the presentation, raise your hand and we'll have roving mics who will come to you. I'm not sure what's doing that. There's 4 microphone runners, Theo, Salzia, Kathy, and Gifts, and they will come to you with the microphone so that you can ask your questions. We ask that you identify yourself by name if you don't want to do that. We certainly are very much interested in the community that you're from so that we can record this meeting. This meeting is being recorded, and it's important for us to capture all the comments. If you do not want to pose a question with the microphone, you can write your question on a card, and then we can read your question out to the group at the front. All questions should be directed through myself, the facilitator and moderator for that. Question time limit. We're putting a time limit of about 2 minutes on your questions so that we can get to as many questions as possible. We have about an hour for questions, so we want to get to as many questions as possible. I will use my facilitator's prerogative to ask you to wrap up your comments if you have comments or get to your question. Once again, your community is important for us, so if you can identify the community you're from, that's important. Please don't interrupt the person who's asking the question or the response. We want to make sure that we have a responsible meeting so we can hear your questions, we can have feedback. So it's important for us to have one conversation at a time. The person with the microphone has the floor, and that's the way we want to run the meeting. There is a presentation that'll be about 45 minutes. We'd ask that you hold your questions. There's going to be time for questions afterwards. You have to write down your questions or write down a slide you want to refer to. Please do that. But we're not going to interrupt the presentation for questions. I'll hand it over to Robin Conley, Director of Community Relations at the GTAA, who will introduce the Noise Management Best Practices Study.
Thanks, Jim. Hello and good evening. Oops. Remove the slide. Giving away. And thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. So as Jim mentioned, tonight's CENAC is a little bit different and dedicated to the release of our Noise Management Program Best Practices Study. But before we get to that, I do have one follow-up item from the last CENAC meeting that I did want to close out with everyone. At that last CENAC meeting, we did commit that we would send Health Canada a letter asking them to update their 2010 report on the human health impacts of aircraft noise. And I just wanted to confirm that that letter was in fact sent to Health Canada and it's available on our website. So with that, I just want to move on. Let's move on to our main event. So as we all know, and that's often what we talk about here at CENAC, when it comes to noise, there's actually no single action or solution that can address the different noise concerns, whether it's aircraft is too low, or it is too loud, or too frequent, or that there has been a change in an operation or a flight path. It's very difficult to find one single solution. But this is where airport noise management programs can help. These programs include a variety of programs and procedures, from nighttime restriction programs or preferential runway schemes to procedures designed to reduce power thrust on takeoff, for example, that may on their own may not have a huge noise benefit, but as a collection can begin to move the dial on reducing noise impacts on community. As part of that work, we have our own noise management program, of course, here at Toronto Pearson. And as part of that work, we have a 5-year rolling noise management action plan. And as part of these 5-year rolling action plans, this is our chance to review our noise management program, to go back to validate, do we have the best policies and procedures in place, and what are some of the things that we should be thinking at. We're about to wrap up our current five-year noise management action plan. We started the last one in 2013, and it's rolled out to 2017. And of course, and in wrapping it up, we sort of saw that as the ideal opportunity to do some research about what other top-tier international airports do in their noise management programs, to understand what we could learn from them, and to identify some new programs and procedures that we could begin to adopt here at Toronto Pearson and introduce in our next five-year noise management action plan from 2018 to 2022. So that's sort of the fruits of this labor, is that research and some recommendations forward for us to consider in our next five-year noise management action plan. Now, of course, this study is just one in a series of different initiatives I'm sure you've heard a lot about that are going on at Toronto Pearson right now to manage the impact of our growing passenger demand for air travel. And while I know that some of you have been incredibly frustrated with the pace with some of these initiatives, I think you will see that with tonight's presentation, we are making some important strides forward. And look forward to sharing with you our full 2018 to 22 Noise Management Action Plan at the next CENAC in December. I also know that many of you are here tonight concerned about another study that is underway, the Toronto Noise Mitigation Initiatives, or the 6 ideas, and how we are exploring to use our runways differently. And I just wanted to share that that's not sort of currently what we're going to talk about in detail tonight. That technical analysis as part of that work is still ongoing, and we do expect to be out later this fall into early winter with the technical analysis and the full public consultation on those runway alternation and preferential runway review schemes. So just with that context setting, it's time to share our noise management program best practices research. So I'd like to introduce our colleagues Kevin and Steve from Helios, who've joined us from the UK, who will walk you through what they've learned and what they are recommending to us to consider next. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. Good evening, everyone. My name is Kevin Tucker. I work for an organisation called Helios. I was the project manager and lead consultant for the best practices in noise management study. And to my left is my colleague Steve Layton. He's the director of our airports area and also the project director for the work. What I'd like to share with you in this presentation is an explanation of the purpose and the background to the study, explain how it was undertaken, and then present to you some of the findings of the research and some of the proposals that we made to GTAA. And in particular, there are 3 areas I'd like to talk about: quieter fleets, runway schemes, and night flight restrictions. And we'll also sort of give some other examples as we go through the presentation. And at the end, there's an opportunity for you to ask any questions that you may have. Okay, background to the study. So, like many airports around the world, GTAA has a 5-year noise management action plan, and lists all the activities that are going to take place over a 5-year period. The current action plan runs from 2013 to 2017, and one of the actions in that is to look at noise management programs at other airports around the world with a view to identifying potential new initiatives and programs that GTAA could take up in their next noise management action plan for the years 2018 to 2022. The aim of those proposals is to have a focus on mitigating the impact of aircraft noise and also enhancing community engagement. So in short, aim of the study, look at what other airports do, make proposals to GTAA, and then GTAA will decide which of those could be taken forward for their next noise management plan. Okay, in terms of how Helios got involved in the study, the work was competitively tendered. We were one of a number of organisations that put forward a proposal to do the work, and we were selected. In terms of how we conducted the work, it was a desk research exercise. So what that means is we looked at information that other airports publish, so their noise management plans, their environmental reports, their performance reports. We also looked at information published by forums such as CENAC that operate at other airports. We looked at other studies that have been conducted around the world, and we looked at something called aeronautical information publications. And these are essentially the information that pilots have when they fly to an airport. In terms of what we looked at 26 airports worldwide. and I'll tell you what they are and why we selected those in the next set of slides. We looked at 11 areas of noise management, and again, I'll give you a summary of what they were. We used the research to develop our proposals, so it was primarily on the basis of best practice that took place at other airports. However, we had to have some other considerations as well. So namely, how Toronto Pearson operates today, so what's part of Toronto's Pearson's noise management program, how the airport operates today, and also something called the regulatory regime. So this is essentially what rules are already in place in Canada related to noise management. And as we see as we go through the presentation, different approaches are used around the world. And also, being a research study, there were naturally gaps in the information we had, so there we had to use best judgment. In terms of our qualifications to do that, on the team we have staff that have undertaken a very similar study for London Heathrow Airport. We've also worked on these types of activities with Heathrow, Gatwick, Hong Kong and Amsterdam Schiphol Airport. Just to give you some context to the proposals themselves, so as I said, they're based on best practice. Within that, we've sort of suggested some ways to take forward, however, ultimately it's for GTAA. The proposals themselves, they weren't based on how much they would cost to implement or the resource requirements. And also I'd like to explain GTAA's involvement in the work. So as part of our terms of reference, we agreed both the airports to be investigated and the areas of noise management with GTAA. When we had conducted our initial research, we shared that with GTAA, and GTAA were also provided with a draft copy of the final report. Okay. In this slide, I would like to both introduce the airports that we have researched and explain why we chose those airports. So initially, we drew up a list of 45 airports. We wanted to reduce that to a manageable number, so we set some very simple criteria. Firstly, we wanted to have some other airports in Canada, so find out how other airports in Canada approach noise management. We also wanted some airports that had a similar number of aircraft movements to Toronto Pearson. The rationale for that is likely to be facing similar challenges, both in terms of noise management issues, resources available to address them. Toronto Pearson is obviously close to an urban environment, so we wanted to make sure we had some airports that were close to built-up areas as well. And of course, because we were looking at noise management, we wanted to have airports that we knew had good noise management schemes. When it came to actually doing the study, really the airports that were of most value were those that hit all three criteria of traffic volume, urban environment, and noise management. So examples of those are Los Angeles, San Francisco, Chicago, Heathrow, Amsterdam, Frankfurt, and Sydney. However, that's not to say that having the other airports wasn't valuable. If we take Vancouver Airport, it's got a very, very pragmatic noise management plan. If we look at somewhere like Gatwick Airport in the UK, in terms of air traffic movements, it's half the size of Toronto. However, in recent years, it's had to reinvigorate its noise management program, so we've learned a lot of lessons from that. Okay. Moving on to the areas of noise management that we've investigated. In the following slides, I'll give you a very short explanation of what each of these are. But in this slide, I'd like to pass on some sort of general observations. So firstly, you'll note that 9 of the areas are highlighted in blue. These are areas that GTAA already has some form of activity. It doesn't mean to say it does the same activities as other airports around the world, and this is the first important lesson from this work. There is no single one list that an airport can tick off that says, if you do all of these activities, you will have a good noise management program. It's based on both local and national factors. So when I refer to local factors, it means, for example, what are the priorities in terms of community concerns? Where is the airport located? In terms of national factors, that can mean how is noise management approached at a national level. So for example, in Canada, night flights are regulated by Transport Canada. However, in other countries, there are other emphases. So in Europe, there's something called noise charging, which I'll explain to you further later. In the United States, if airports conduct what's called a voluntary land use plan, they automatically qualify for federal funding for something called noise insulation schemes. So in the United States, there's a big influence on noise insulation. Something else to clarify, given that a number of you have followed the airspace review that's been undertaken with NAV Canada, is why in this study are we also covering some areas in other studies? And the reasons for that are twofold. Firstly, in noise management, several stakeholders are involved in the process. And also, as we see in some countries, the responsibilities for sort of certain noise management activities fall with different parties. Okay, in the following slides, I'm just going to give a very, very brief overview of each of the 11 areas of noise management, just so you have an understanding of broadly what they mean. Quieter fleet initiatives. This is the way that an airport encourages an airline to fly the quietest aircraft in its fleet to that airport. And in later slides, I'm going to go through some examples of those. Night flight restrictions. This is investigating if an airport has a defined period in the night where it applies a much stricter set of procedures and rules compared to the daytime. And again, we'll look at that in more detail. Runway use. So firstly, do airports use their runways to manage noise? And secondly, how do they do that? What are their objectives? Is it sharing noise, focusing noise on the least populated or unpopulated areas, or having some sort of timetable where communities know when they will and won't be overflown? And again, that's another area that we'll look at. Aircraft on the ground, this looked at primarily two areas. Firstly, engine testing, primarily at night. Is engine testing allowed? Are there any restrictions? So for example, how long it's allowed to take place, and does it have to take place at a particular point on the airfield? The other relates to noise generated by aircraft parked at the airfield, so parked on the stand. Aircraft are able to power themselves with their own engines or an auxiliary engine while parked on the ground. However, this generates noise. So at a number of airports around the world, there are rules in place about how long the engines can stay on after the aircraft is parked and how long in advance of leaving the stand they can turn on their engines. Noise abatement procedures. This is about procedures that try and get aircraft to fly in the quietest way possible, either while they're landing or while they're taking off. Land use planning, this is about the rules related to how the land around an airport is managed in terms of use. So, for example, what rules are in place and how are they defined in terms of where can residential properties be located in close proximity to an airport? Where can noise-sensitive buildings, so things like schools, be located in proximity to an airport? And also any associated mitigations, so for example, noise insulation schemes. Noise complaints, this is looking at how airports receive complaints, how they deal with those complaints once they're received, and what they do with those complaints. So are they reviewed on a regular basis? Community outreach, this is forums such as CENAC. We looked at, do the forums exist? How do they work? Who chairs them? Do they have their own program of work? Okay, final three. Noise reporting and metrics. As many of you know, airports are able to put a noise monitor into the community and make measurements of aircraft noise. However, noise is measured in decibels and it's not an easily understood unit. So this is looking at how airports report and provide information on aircraft noise in an understandable way. And finally, the two that we said GTAA currently isn't involved in. The first is something called fly quiet reporting. It only takes place at 4 airports in the study. What it is, it's voluntary, it's when an airport and its airlines voluntarily agree to report to the public on a series of noise metrics. For example, that could be the composition of the fleet in terms of noise, or it could also include things like adherence to noise abatement procedures. And finally, a noise ombudsman. This is an independent third party that's involved in noise. Traditionally, it's been related to resolving noise complaints. However, what we're seeing now is a shift towards an involvement in airspace issues. It's not a very common role. The only active noise ombudsman is currently in Australia. However, what we're seeing in the United States, we're seeing the old noise ombudsman role being reinvigorated, and we're also seeing the possibility of a noise ombudsman in the United Kingdom. So I'm just going to take a quick sip of water, if you allow me. Okay, so those are the airports we looked at, the practices we looked at. We undertook our research, and from that, we developed 30 proposals for GTAA to consider for their next noise management plan. The 30 are listed on the right, and I believe you all have a summary in front of you. Broadly, these fall into 5 categories. The first group is reducing the impact of aircraft noise, and the second group is managing night noise. And in the following slides, I'm going to give you some examples of the research and the proposals in each of these areas. There are also 3 other categories which I'll summarise at the end. This is community and industry engagement, data reporting and initiatives, and also examining voluntary initiatives. So initiatives that typically don't take place in Canada, that there's no requirement placed on GTAA to do them, but it's worth examining them at the present time. So the first example, quieter fleet initiatives. I'll show you one slide which summarises the different activities that airports undertake around the world, and then I'll explain the proposals that we've subsequently made on the basis of that research. So first we have something called operating restrictions. This is restricting the noisiest aircraft types, typically at night. To give you some background, the International Civil Aviation Organization, it categorises aircraft into 4 groups referred to as chapters. Chapter 2 is the oldest category. This was established in 1972. Since then, there's been Chapter 3, Chapter 4, and most recently, in 2017, Chapter 14. Around the world, it's generally recognised that restrictions or no operations of Chapter 2 aircraft should be allowed, and Toronto is one of the airports that doesn't allow that at night. What we are starting to see is at airports such as Amsterdam Schiphol, Frankfurt and Paris Charles de Gaulle, that airports are starting to put restrictions on aircraft that only just reach the Chapter 3 standard at night. And these are referred to as marginally compliant Chapter 3 aircraft. Noise-based charging, this is where an airport places a noise charge on an aircraft as part of its landing fee. And the simple principle of that is that quieter aircraft are charged the least and noisiest aircraft are charged the most. And also we see at some airports these charges are increased at night. So at places like Schiphol and Heathrow, typically noise charges will increase by about a factor of 2 during the night time. There are also a few examples of financial incentives. This is where an airport, just going back to noise-based charging, this actually is only particular to Europe, so airports that operate in Europe. Financial incentives. This is where an airport tries to encourage an airline to operate quieter aircraft through incentives. An example here is at Zurich Airport, where the airport incentivizes an airline, for example, to operate a quieter aircraft on a particular route. If it meets certain noise criteria, for the next 3 years, that airline will receive a discount on its fees. A320 family retrofit. This is related to the A320 family of aircraft. The there are vents under the wings of the aircraft, and when the aircraft is on approach, it creates a whine, so a bit like blowing over the top of a beer bottle. It's been found that by undertaking a retrofit of that aircraft, the noise generated by the aircraft can reduce by 4 to 9 decibels. So although it's a relatively recent activity, a number of airports around the world have been working with airlines to retrofit these aircraft. The approaches taken have varied quite widely. For example, in Europe, airports have used their noise-based charging schemes to encourage airlines to retrofit. If we look at somewhere like Gatwick Airport, the charges of an unretrofitted aircraft compared to a retrofitted aircraft are a factor of 30 different. In the United States, a completely different approach has been taken. Here, the noise forums, so the equivalents of CENAC at places like San Francisco, Chicago, and Los Angeles actually grouped together, and they worked with United Airlines to get A320s flying into that airport retrofitted, and the first aircraft were retrofitted in 2017. Also, fly quiet reporting, so airports actually reporting on the noisiness of the fleet at that airport. It works, it puts the airline's fleet in the public domain, and it also gives the opportunity for the airport to work with that airline. There is something I would, however, like to highlight with all of these. If, for example, I'm United Airlines or Air France, and I'm flying to Toronto, and Toronto is trying to get airlines to fly the quietest aircraft possible, it's quite easy for me to put the quietest aircraft in my fleet on the Toronto route. If I'm a Toronto-based carrier, such as NAV Canada or WestJet, I've got a fixed fleet based at Toronto, so it takes a lot longer for these initiatives to take effect. I'd now like to introduce the proposals that we've made to GTAA. Firstly, GTAA should investigate the merits of applying more restrictions on the noisiest aircraft types at night time. So, for example, the marginally compliant Chapter 3 aircraft that were mentioned. We're proposing that GTAA establish a program to retrofit A320 aircraft. And also, although it's not part of the way that noise management is undertaken in Canada, we think that GTAA should investigate financial mechanisms should they be required at any stage in the future. Okay, the second of the three examples I'd like to share with you is the use of runway schemes. So this is looking at, firstly, do airports around the world use their runway for noise management purposes? And how do they do so? So do they do it to share noise? Do they do it to provide communities with a defined break from aircraft noise? Or do they use it to focus aircraft either on the least populated or unpopulated areas? And again, I'll show you a couple of slides summarising the research findings. I'll provide some specific examples from how the runways operate at both Heathrow and Sydney Airport. And then I'll talk about our proposals in context of the work that GTAA and NAV Canada are currently undertaking. So our first example of runway usage is preferential runway schemes, effectively where the airport has an order of priority for how the runways are used. So Toronto does this at night. Amsterdam Schiphol does this through the entire day. The aim of the Schiphol scheme is to focus aircraft noise on the least populated areas. And it does this by having a prioritised list of runway use. The top runway, if the weather conditions and visibility, so visibility, wind strength and wind direction are met for the first runway combination, this combination is used. If they're not met, then the next set of priority runways are looked at, and if that's not met, so on and so forth. So you go down the prioritised list. Another way of using runways is a fixed timetable. This is where, for example, the airport will use certain runways at the same time of day every day. And we see an example here at Brussels Airport. So in the morning, for example, runway A is used for landing. In the afternoon, runway B is used for landing, and in the evening and night, runway C is used for landing. And this pattern continues week in, week out. This means that the same people are overflown at the same time of day each day. So another approach is to use a rotating timetable. So although people know when they're being overflown, they know they'll be overflown at different times of the day, depending on what week. And this is a scheme that's used at London Heathrow Airport. So if we look at the top diagram here, at Heathrow in week 1, aircraft will land on the northern runway from 6 a.m. to 3 p.m. In the afternoon, it'll switch, and aircraft will only take off from the northern runway. So this gives some sort of predictability when people will be overflown. However, to make sure it doesn't happen at the same time every day, there's a second week to the runway alternation program. So you'll see here, instead of week 1, where the aircraft land on the northern runway in the morning, aircraft take off. And similarly, instead of taking off from the northern runway in the afternoon, they land in the runway in the afternoon. Two other concepts are directing noise to least populated areas and also noise sharing. And I'll use Sydney as an example of this. Sydney has something called the long-term operating plan. And the idea of that plan is twofold. Firstly, to direct as many aircraft as possible over Botany Bay. And secondly, to have a reasonable, equitable share of noise for the other for urban areas under the flight paths. It does this by having various modes of runway operation with certain noise sharing modes. However, with all runway schemes, what we found is the challenge is conformance. It's actually very, very difficult to achieve 100% performance with these schemes. That can be due to traffic demand, prevailing weather conditions, obviously safety factors such as runway inspections. And we found the level of conformance varies quite considerably. So Heathrow has a good conformance of around 90–95%. We've seen a trial at Chicago of nighttime runway use where the conformance was as low as 67%. So the trick here is with runway schemes is to understand the likely level of conformance and report against those publicly. So how does this fit in terms of the current GTAA work? So GTAA and Nav Canada are working on two activities, as many of you know. Firstly is reviewing the existing preferential runway scheme, and the second is exploring opportunities for runway alternation during the weekend during the summer. So in terms of proposals, first question we ask ourselves is, do airports around the world use runways for noise sharing purposes? And the answer is yes, they do. So on the basis of that, these activities should continue to be investigated. However, we see that there's a need for some requirements to be placed around them. They should demonstrate what they're intended to achieve. They should have community support. They should demonstrate that a suitable level of conformance should be achieved, and they should undergo a public consultation. And if implemented, there should be an understanding about the expected level of performance, and there should be regular reporting against that level of conformance and the reasons for non-conformance. Okay. The third example is managing night noise. So as we said earlier, this is looking at if airports have a period of the night where they apply a more stringent set of operating procedures compared to the day. We found that half the airports investigated, plus Toronto, do something of this nature. And these are shown on the right-hand side in terms of their start and end times. So as we'll see, Toronto at the top of the list, its night period starts later than other airports. It's 6 hours in duration, similar to Vancouver and Frankfurt, but shorter than many of the other airports. But also, it actually starts late, it finishes later in the morning. So those are just the timings. What we haven't got there is actually what activities take place during those periods, what restrictions are in place. And I'll explain these on the next slides. So firstly, as we've said, some airports don't have any procedures for the night time, and these are typically airports in the United States, the Middle East, and the Far East. As we said during the discussion on quieter fleets, a number of airports have restrictions on older, noisier aircraft types, including Toronto. Next, a number of airports have a limit on the total number of night flights. So, for example, Toronto has its night flight budget. This is typically managed by the regulator rather than the airport itself, so the limits are set nationally. In addition to a limit on the total number of night flights, some airports also try and manage the total amount of night noise. This is either through something called a quota scheme, where essentially the airport allocates itself a number of noise points, and each time an aircraft lands or takes off, based on the noise it generates, a number of points are deducted from that scheme. And on the next slide, I've got an example of Heathrow, so I'll explain the Heathrow noise quota system in a bit more detail. Some airports also use night noise contours to measure this. And a final practice is a curfew. This is either where the airport allows no night flights to take place, or there are very, very strict rules. So in terms of an example of an airport with no night flights, as many of you know, that's Frankfurt. It has... Okay. Okay.
Yes, please.
Okay.
No one controls the flights over my house. No one stops the interruption and the harassment and abuse that's happening to people in here.
Can we have no heckling, please? We'll get to your comments. We'll come to you. Don't worry.
I don't understand this here. You may ask people to turn off cell phones to have decorum here. There has not been decorum by the airport or NAV Canada.
Hold your comments, please. I'm asking for decorum so we can finish the presentation and we'll get to your questions.
We've been asking the same question for years and we're not getting an appropriate answer.
We'll,
People have been more than patient. People have been more than We have not been shown the same courtesy.
so do you understand heckling and what no heckling means? We're asking for no heckling. We're asking to finish the presentation in a respectful way. Would you like to finish the presentation? Would you like... Yes, we do. We're asking if you would like to finish the presentation. The microphones will come around for questions. Would you like to finish the presentation? Thank you. Please continue.
Okay, thank you. So as we said, Frankfurt has a curfew where no night flights are allowed between 11 o'clock at night and 5 o'clock in the morning. Interestingly, if you go back to the other diagram, Frankfurt opens an hour earlier than most other European airports. Another example of a curfew is Sydney. It has a very specific set of rules. However, we've said it's a curfew because it's actually part of what's called the Sydney Airport Curfew Act. The rules essentially are that aircraft operating at night must fly over Botany Bay. There are 24 intercontinental arrivals allowed each week between 5 in the morning and 6 in the morning. And also within the night period, there are provisions for certain aircraft types to fly what's referred to as time-critical cargo. If you add all of that up, that equates to approximately 5,000 movements per annum. Okay. Next, I'm going to give an example from Heathrow Airport, so looking at how all of these things work together. The night flight regime at Heathrow is undertaken by the UK government, so the Department for Transport. The core night period lasts from 23:30 to 0600. It has a movement limit of approximately 9,800 movements per annum. It also has a noise quota scheme. The airport is allowed to use up what are referred to as 9,800 noise quota points. However, in a year's time, that's going to be reduced by 40%. How this works is each aircraft is given a noise quota based on the amount of noise it generates, and this is taken from something called the certified noise levels that are present on each aircraft operating certificate. And on the basis of that, a number of noise quota points will be derived. So to give you some generic examples, a Boeing 747, when it takes off, that will use up 4 noise quota points. When it lands, it will use up 2 noise quota points. A smaller aircraft such as the A320, when it takes off, it will use up 1 noise quota point. When it lands, it will typically use 0.5 or 0.2 noise quota points. Also, in the core of the night, there are increased noise charges. There's a nighttime runway alternation scheme, which operates every 2 weeks. And also, outside of the night period, there's something called shoulder hours. And these are periods where there are restrictions that are more restrictive than the day, but not quite as restrictive as the core night. And the idea of this prepares the airport to go into the night period or into the daytime. And this typically takes the form of stricter operating restrictions or scheduling restrictions. So how does this translate into proposals? Well, first, as we saw earlier, the night period at Toronto is shorter than many other airports and starts later. So our first proposal is to extend the time over which the night noise impacts are managed. This doesn't necessarily mean applying the same night budget scheme which is regulated by Transport Canada to these new periods. The aim, our suggestion is that GTAA work with local communities to define what sort of rules take place in those hours. In terms of night noise, there should be no overall increase in night noise. So there should be some sort of form of measure, for example, a night quota scheme or night noise contours. And as we've introduced in earlier proposals, they should also look at things like restricting the noisiest aircraft types at night, and also investigate whether financial mechanisms would be of use. Yeah. I'm going to finish the presentation now looking at the other 3 groups that we investigated. I won't go into as much detail on those, but I'll give you as much information as I can. Engagement, we looked at both community and industry engagement. In terms of the community forums, we looked at how forums were run and what activities they undertook at other airports. What we found was that a number of forums either aren't run by the airport or they're chaired by someone that doesn't work for the airport. So one proposal there is to increase the independence of GTAA from CENAC from GTAA. Also, we found that many airport forums also have their own work program that's based on community priorities. So again, we're proposing that GTA consider having a work program. And also, we think there should be mechanisms for wider community involvement, which doesn't necessarily mean expanding the forum. On the industry side, we think there's merit in having an industry forum that has overall responsibility for noise management activities at Toronto Pearson. And by industry, I mean the airport, the traffic service provider, so NAV Canada, and also the main airlines, as well as the regulator. And this could involve things such as industry codes of practice, which are effectively sort of making sure that everyone that's flying in and out of the airport is aware of what best practices in noise management at Toronto Pearson. Data and reporting, this is looking at having structured, evidence-based approaches to continue to improve the noise environment at Toronto Pearson. So, for example, in the case of noise complaints, having a formal policy on how complaints are handled, and also having a structured way of reviewing noise complaints to identify any sort of community concerns. And also, potentially, a fly quiet program. In terms of examining involuntary initiatives, this is where we said that there are some activities that are outside of the typical activities that would take place in Canada. And one of those is looking at circumstances under which it would be appropriate for GTAA to apply a voluntary noise insulation scheme. As we've mentioned several times already, investigating the potential use of financial mechanisms. So in summary, the purpose of our work was to research noise management activities at other airports around the world, and in doing so, propose potential new programs or initiatives for GTAA to pursue in their next noise management action plan. To do that, we researched 11 areas of noise management, and we also investigated activities at 26 airports. As a result of that, we've made proposals for 30 new potential programs or initiatives for GTAA to consider. However, as I said at the start, just to highlight, these were based purely on practices at other airports, and we didn't take account of any financial or resource costs involved. Thank you for your time and attention.
Just before we get to questions, we just have two other short presentations. So I invite Hilary Marshall, Vice President at GTA, to say a few remarks.
Kevin, is it possible to move push it down?
Yeah, just bring it down.
Great, thanks very much. Hi everyone, thanks so much for joining us this evening. Kevin and Steve, thank you very much for your efforts to take us on a world tour of airport noise management programs. Your study shows that there are important things we can learn from some of the world's most successful airports that will reduce the impact of our operations. I can see big thought bubbles over your heads. You want to know which of these recommendations will be part of our new 5-year noise management program. Some of these recommendations are things we can get moving on right away, while some are significant and will take time to understand and implement. All of them will require a discussion with our Noise and Environment Committee, who help to represent community members and their interests. As a result, our new Noise Management Action Plan will be put forth at our next CENAC meeting in December, once we've had time for a deeper discussion on priorities. We know that we must consider noise mitigation initiatives that have been demonstrated to have material benefit for communities. We need to consider adopting increasingly stringent night flight operating rules, insulation programs for homes, a more independent community noise forum, and a quieter fleet incentive program. But we don't want to wait until December to show you how seriously we're taking these recommendations. That's why tonight I'm pleased to be able to confirm that we'll move forward with the design and implementation of a quieter fleet incentive program. Now there you go. Let me tell you what it means. What does that mean and why is it important to our local communities? You have told us you want us to take a leadership role with respect to addressing noisier aircraft operating at Toronto Pearson. A quieter fleet incentive program and ultimately a fly quiet reporting mechanism will allow us to do that by creating incentives or penalties related to noisier aircraft and aircraft operating in the nighttime hours. One particular issue raised by the community, as well as in both the GTA's Best Practices Study and NAV Canada's Independent Toronto Airspace Noise Review, found that the A320 series aircraft creates a noticeable whine that can be addressed through a simple retrofit. Helios said that this would be the single most significant noise impact that can be addressed out of their many recommendations, both to us as well as to NAV Canada. Communities across the GTA have raised this matter as one where they want us to take action. And that's why we're moving ahead on this particular item in advance of the December CENAC meeting. Our quieter fleet incentive program, which will be in place within the next 18 to 24 months, will address first the A320 series aircraft operating at Toronto Pearson. What does this mean? It means that consistent with other airports around the world, the carriers who have not undertaken the retrofit by the time the program is in place will face fines. We believe our air carriers will support our efforts to address your community concerns and undertake this simple retrofit. We've advised our carrier partners and their industry association of our intention to move ahead with this new noise management program and the need for all industry participants to work together to address community concerns. You told us you wanted us to take action on this front. We hope this announcement is an early indication of our commitment to work with you to address the impact of noise. We look forward to working with CENAC, NAV Canada, Transport Canada, and our carrier partners to further address your concerns with our new noise management action plan that will be released in December. I'd like to wrap up tonight by reminding you that we're nearing milestones on the many pieces of noise management work we've undertaken, and we'll have a lot to share with you in the coming months. So, the Residents' Reference Panel report and recommendations will be released on October 11th. NAV Canada's response to the study you heard about today later in the fall. Our noise mitigation initiatives, based on the 6 ideas, will be released this winter with consultation in the spring. And as we've said before, Toronto Pearson's vision is to be the best airport in the world. But this doesn't mean the biggest airport. It does mean we're committed to ensuring safety is our highest priority. It means we're going to work at being a good neighbor. It means supporting regional connectivity and further connecting Southern Ontario to the rest of the world in terms of facilitating trade, tourism, and immigration. And being the best in the world also means learning from other airports that are the world's best, particularly on how we can manage the impact of our operations, which was the main goal of this study. Now I'm going to turn it over to Michelle Bishop from NAV Canada. I believe she wants to address the independent airspace review with this audience. Thank you.
Thank you. As Hillary mentioned, my name is Michelle Bishop. I'm the Director of Government and Public Affairs at NAV Canada. I'm sure that I've met many of you at many of these forums over the years. I don't want to take a lot of time. Many of you would have attended the release last week of the other Helios report done by your colleagues. Nick Bowd and Beau Redbourne held a meeting last Monday at which they briefed on their recommendations in the independent Toronto Noise Airspace Review. For those of you who were unable to attend that meeting and are interested in finding out more about it, the final report, the presentation they gave last week, and a video copy of the actual meeting at which they gave that presentation and explained their recommendations is available on their website, which is torontoairspacereview.ca. As I mentioned, we just got this report 10 days ago. We have brought together a committee within the company to go through its recommendations. There's a lot of substance here. This was a year-long process in which they went out and held consultations in the community. They spoke with the airlines, they spoke with the airports, they made many data requests of us in order to undertake this work. And we are going in depth through the many recommendations that they've made. We have committed to come back to the community in a transparent fashion within 60 days. So by my count, I think I've got 50 left. With a substantive response to all of the recommendations that are made. So we intend to, in the intervening period, to be looking at what's viable, to be looking at near-term action plans, and coming back out to you in a substantive way. When we undertook this process, we indicated we were interested in any recommendations that they could come forward with respect to the design of the airspace that could minimize community impact of aircraft operations, and they've certainly given us a lot of substance to look at. So if you haven't seen that report, I encourage you to take a look at it, and as Hillary said, we're coming back in that November timeframe with our response to it. Thank you.
Okay, it's just about 7:30. We are going to adjourn at 8:30, so we have just over an hour for questions. If you have questions, please put up your hands. And I've been requested by the Yellow Shirt group to start off with a statement. So I'm going to start with this group. The microphones can come up to the front here. This gentleman just wanted to start off. And then there will be 4 microphone roamers who will put up your hands, and they'll come to you as we go through it. So introduce yourself and what community are you, or communities are you from? It's on.
Hello, hello. There we go.
It's on.
My name is Mark Kuis. I represent a group called the Community Alliance for Air Safety. We're representing about 20,000 citizens that are from south of the airport, and we're now seeing support from 360 degrees around the city of Toronto. I'd like to introduce 2 of my colleagues, Sharon Langley and Al Kaminsky. We're the public relations team for CAS. And so if anyone wants to talk to us later, all 3 of us or any one of the yellow shirts can give you support. We started in July. We saw some things that we were concerned about, and we weren't getting the right answers. We weren't getting the right callbacks. So we have put together 10 communities, and it's interesting, every week we double in size. So last week we had 10,000 hits on social media, and we're up to 20,000 hits as of 15 minutes ago. Statements have been made in the past that the city of Toronto is okay with this growth, and we beg to differ. So let me go through a couple things here. So first of all, CENAC has claimed that there's a residence panel. Claims to success is there's a residence panel in place. 3 of the 36 panelists live within 7 kilometers of the airport. The sound monitoring stations have been installed for the last 5 years. Complaints have been collected for the last 5 years, but we have not seen any results. Typical responses that we've seen in multiple meetings, whether it's elected officials or individual meetings or CENAC or Helios or so on, has been, it's not our focus, it's not our mandate, that's NAV Canada, Transport Canada, that's Air Canada. We're looking into it and we're working on it. I don't know. So our conclusion is CENAC is just wired for the airport agenda. Our result is people are coming out of the woodwork. We have industry insiders, people that work for these organizations coming out to us and giving us information and saying, you need to ask these kinds of questions because things are not being addressed. We even had one person talking about the fact that CENAC is really just there to collect data and ignore the results and just keep working on the GTA agenda. There are so many things. There are so many things that CENAC and the GTA could have done in the last 5 years as you're wrapping up your campaign. Enforcement of fines, forcing retrofit of aircraft, eliminating night flights like Frankfurt did. F- is the marks from the community. So you see the shirts, you see safety. Safety is our focus. And our insight improves every single week. It's just amazing how much information we're gathering. But it's clear to us that GTA is looking to double the capacity, and it's all about return on investment for the shareholders and the executives. It's clear that the government oversight is missing, and the GTA is driving full speed ahead. The GTA is driving full speed ahead with NAV Canada at their side. It's clear that Transport Canada has mandated operational requirements, and the feedback that we're getting is just the feedback that we're getting is that for operational requirements, they just don't seem to mean anything. Mandated requirements that have been documented for many years, and the feedback is, well, we have stuff that just refutes that, but we just don't get it. We don't get any of that feedback back. It's clear the National Safety Board is got lots of audits in place. It's clear that the Pilots Association has red flagged the organization, saying that pilots should use vigilance when landing at our airport. It's clear that the air traffic controllers have had problems, staffing problems, where sometimes they don't have the people. I don't know why it is, but these are the things that we keep learning. And I could go on, but I think I've made my point. So, we know that the GTA has signed a 10-year deal with Air Canada to increase flights and reduce landing fees. We know that GTA has no intent of being a good neighbor because your 5-year program is an F-. There's nothing that's happened. So the community's at rock bottom for trust, 0. We know that our government oversight is providing little or no influence, and in some facts, people are saying, industry insiders have pulled me aside and said they've visited 60 countries around the world, and so Canada's government oversight is at the bottom of the list. We're failing, and it's absolutely horrendous. Okay, so here's the ask. I promised an ask. So CENAC must become an objective voice of the community, or please just shut it down. So Helios, you talked about the ombudsman that's going on in Australia, the objective ombudsman who can mitigate these things. We need to do that here. We need to do that here. We'd like to see, I know the MPs have asked this question and we're asking the same question, we'd like to see the agreement between Air Canada and GTA. We would like direct communication with the National Safety Board, so when they go through their audits, we see it. And we'd like to see the safety audit results for the last 25 years, because as international standards go, if you're changing an operational model, you've got to go back, look at the problems, and do the risk mitigation. So we're looking for the data for 25 years back. We're also looking for all the violations that have happened in the last 25 years, because these fines are not being enforced here. Many countries around the world, you talk about Europe, what a good job they're doing in enforcing fines. It's not happening here. So if it is, prove it. We'd also now, at that point, like to see GTAA and Nav Canada produce a 10-year operational plan that has a detailed risk assessment and shows how they're going to mitigate the risk going forward with some of the suggestions going on. And that has to be overseen by Transport Canada. Transport Canada is our government oversight for this. And they're MIA. So, the other part is we've assembled hundreds of people. I'm sure it'll be thousands of people in CAS. This residents group that's representing 36 people as far as out as Oshawa with 3 people within 7 kilometers of the airport. CAS would like to have part of that process to make sure that we have a couple of our executives on the table. And our executives are one from each neighborhood. We're not racking and stacking any neighborhood. We're going across the border. And let's see what happens. But we're really disappointed, and it's time for action. And sometimes if you don't like what's happening, you either step up and do something or go home. We're not going home.
So you told me you had a copy you would be able to leave with the GTA of the ask. So if you have a written copy, that would be good, or email that in. So just to be clear to the rest of the room, this gentleman asked me for leave to go beyond the 2 minutes because he was representing so many people, so I granted that request. I still would like to keep to a couple of minutes for the questions for the rest of the evening. So question at the back, and then we have another question there. So we'll go back and forth to the two sides. We'll want to get to as many people as possible. We still have almost an hour, so we've got lots of time. Just, I can't hear you. Can that mic go up?
Yes, I have a microphone.
Okay.
My name is Steve Roscoe, and I'm here representing probably everybody here, but specifically the Rockwood Homeowners Association, which is 5,000 homes south of the airport, within 5 kilometers from the runway. So the massive increase of flights that happened a couple of months back was absolutely devastating. So I have a couple of questions, and one is, does the Helios research include mainly passenger flights, or does this factor in freight in terms of time of flight and noise restrictions? Because recently the GTAA undercut competitors to win the FedEx contract, and currently Peel is lobbying to win the Amazon contract, which would be a massive increase of freight flights, noise pollution, and air pollution. So maybe somebody can be assigned for that question. And the other question is, in terms of the cost, I guess the noise penalties and the money that would be generated from that, which I would think to be substantial, who would receive that money? Is that money going into a residence fund, perhaps?
Who wants to tackle that question?
Okay, so
It's on.
would you like me to repeat?
No, the first one was about freight.
Yeah.
Yeah. So to clarify, internationally, when we see any of these restrictions being applied, they apply equally between passenger and cargo aircraft. So everything would be included as far as we're concerned.
Okay, thank you.
Did you also have questions about the number of cargo flights we have?
Yes.
Okay. Shall we?
I guess my question was, has the GTAA been involved with the conversations about lobbying to win the Amazon contract? Or are you not a part of it? Are they just going to win that over, and then you're going to have to retract your promises?
The question
You know
was
what I'm
about,
talking about?
The question was about the percentage of cargo flights. I think.
Yeah, we're going to start with cargo, and then I'll answer Amazon.
That's not what I asked. Guys, I'm going to come closer. Okay. Yeah, all right. Specifically, everybody wants to get the Amazon contract, and Peel is also part of that. So the question is, have you been involved in that discussion, or is this just something you're going to have to deal with after it's a done deal?
So when we've been asked for information, for those who don't know, Amazon's request for potential candidates includes a long list of criteria that they look for in a potential city. And one of the criteria is a major international airport with connectivity to some key destinations, which obviously makes Toronto potentially an ideal candidate based on that fact alone, because we do have international airport with strong connectivity to Seattle, DC, and some of the other locations that they mentioned in their RFP. Are we involved in the proposal? No, we're not, but we have provided information when asked by various municipalities.
Okay, but assuming that that does go ahead, which is pretty likely, then there's going to be a lot of infractions on the noise limitations. So with the penalty funds, are you collecting it and spending it as you wish, or is there actually a specific plan for compensation for residents, or for, I don't know, just where is that money going?
I think a few things. I think first, we still right now have our night flight budget, and we are restricted by the number of flights that can move at night, and so we can't grow that beyond that. So if Amazon came here and needed to operate at night, it would have to be within our existing budget. So they
don't just pay more?
No.
Okay, because that would just be passed on to the consumer.
Sure, and that's fair, and we're constrained by that. I would just also add, for the most part, 80% of cargo is in the belly of aircraft, of passenger aircraft. So, and that's very consistent across airports, and that's very true here as well. So I think that's an important thing to remember. But then back to this idea of quieter fleet incentive programs and different things that we do to incentivize airlines to have the quietest fleet, or do we put a premium on different flying at night or not? Those are things that we're looking at, and if there were fines and funds that came out of that, that is typical best practice that those go back into community development programs or insulation schemes. And so that is common, and so as these things develop here, I think that would also be common here.
Okay, good to hear. Now just one closing remark.
I think you're past your 2 minutes.
In terms of Helios, in your final proposal, is there one of the 30 that actually factors in proximity of schools that are heavily impacted, because we have a lot of schools in the Rockwood area and we have flights going directly over. So that's a lot of air pollution and a lot of things that impact children's learning. So is that part of your study, where schools and how they're affected, was that part of your study?
It's on.
Okay. So in terms of what we looked at for land use planning, we looked at
Speak louder.
Hold the mic.
Sorry.
Like this.
It's sorry. In terms of land use planning, we looked at the current rules placed by Transport Canada on GTAA, which is something called the Airport Operating Area, and that states rules for land use around an airport.
So not specifically, schools were not a specific factor?
It just states, I believe it states about residential buildings and potentially noise-sensitive buildings, which are schools. So it states that there shouldn't be any of these buildings within this airport operating area, which equates to a noise contour.
Okay. Okay, thank you for answering my questions.
Next question.
Left front, please.
Next question here. Oh. Over here? Okay, sorry. Over here?
Hi.
And then we're coming to here, and then we'll go back to the other side.
Hi there. My name is Jenny Ribeiro. I'm with Long Branch, right at the lake south of the airport. My question is regarding information that I'm looking into, which is the introduction of C-44. Pertaining to the Canadian Infrastructure Bank. So the bill establishes that it's going to be a Crown corporation, and it's going to be, it's in its second reading. It'll be up and running by the end of this year. So one of their things is collecting money for infrastructure, which I believe Toronto Pearson may fall into that. So any monies that are collected from fines and so that sort of thing, I'm thinking maybe even rooted into this infrastructure bank. Also, I want to know, pertaining to privatization, which the government has actually had a report that they have been looking at and haven't released any information as of yet. But I have a feeling that it's going to coincide when the bill passes. So, majority of your Helios was in direct comparison to a lot of private airports around the world that are already private. The United States is also going that route. So what relevance is CENAC going to have once a portion and or all of the GTAA or Toronto Pearson has been sold off?
So maybe I'll just take a step back and start by saying that the infrastructure bank was part of the government's budget bill, which passed, and it will be implemented by the end of the year. This is just based on, what I follow. So that is going ahead. The infrastructure bank, I believe, is looking at partnering private sector with public funds to act as a flywheel for reinvestment. I think I read it in the budget documents as well. What does that mean for Toronto Pearson? What does ownership mean for Toronto Pearson? We haven't taken a position. The federal government owns the airport. They're going to decide what they want to do with it. In terms of what it means for noise management and CENAC, I think Helios could probably speak better than I can to the number of privatized airports around the world that have noise management programs, and so I'll pass it over to them.
Thank you. In terms of what we see, there is not normally a significant distinction between the ownership model of an airport and its need to engage with the community. We see Heathrow is a prime example, a private airport which has a very active community noise forum and a lot of engagement. To an extent, it depends very much how the regulatory system is established around the airport and what the airport is required to do. But certainly they like to think they embody best practice in their engagement on the community side. And I wouldn't envisage it being any different here, depending on the ownership model.
So there hasn't been any indication of talks with our federal government on the selling of our airports? That
is up to the federal government to decide, and they own the asset. There has not been an announcement or a proposal that's come forward.
Okay, we have to move on. There's a lot of more questions, so thank you for your questions. We're going to move on to this person over here. Can you introduce yourself, please, and the community you're from?
Yes, my name is Manny Matos, and I am from the Alderwood Long Branch community. And just for geography, we're just south of the airport, so we're down by Lakeshore and Browns Line. I don't have a particular question. I just have a statement that I'd like to make, and I'll try to keep it short. So that's why I wrote it down. So it starts off by saying 2 wrongs don't make a right. It was wrong for NAV Canada to move the south downwind 5 years ago. The fact that we are all here proves that. As a consequence of moving the off-ramp location, many new communities are now experiencing airplane noise on a regular basis. I live in one of those communities that is part of this off-ramp. We now have airplane noise, regardless of wind direction, every day. In addition, we're also the very noisy entry point into the north and south downwind. That's new. Since this off-ramp was changed, we're now part of the entry point at the base of Browns Line and Lakeshore. We also have noisy prop planes leaving Billy Bishop Airport, and we also have, excuse me, I'm just going to sit down and steady myself. We also have noisy flight using runways 15 and 33 for a number of reasons. Weather, wind, runway maintenance, plane weight and size, grass cutting, rain, and well, just because. We are now being asked to share more noise. We're already sharing more noise than ever. We oppose runway alternation, as it will impose another layer of noise over what we already contend with. The new downwind was created to allow NAV Canada to build a bigger off-ramp to get planes into Pearson. Bigger off-ramps are not the answer. They add noise, they waste fuel, increase flying time, increase potential for mid-air collisions, and on top of that, pollute the air. If two wrongs don't make a right, then what's the right thing to do? A new sister airport to Pearson. This would lessen, if not eliminate, the need This would lessen, if not eliminate, the need for the huge off-ramps. This would eliminate noise at source and eliminate noise from reaching the ground. Two key guiding principles of the Helios study. It's time to stop the Band-Aid approach to noise mitigation at Pearson. It's time to build a new sister airport to take us beyond 2030. It's time.
Can I ask you to wrap it up, please? There's other questions.
It's time for the GTAA to act upon the McKinsey and Company report of 2015. It's time for a vision for air travel for Southern Ontario, which goes beyond 2030. We oppose runway alternation in any of its forms.
So, question over here. Introduce yourself, please.
Tina Rizzuto-Willen, CENAC member. I'm sad that Mark doesn't like me, despite the fact that we've worked so closely together, and he thinks I'm wired. I can definitively say that, Mark, I'm for you, and I'm happy that this is going on. I'm a little creeped out that you looked at where I live, and you're saying I'm not within 7. I'm underneath the preferential nighttime runway, and I get a lot of these flights. I want to say that I'm so thankful for Mark. So thankful for Chris in Georgetown. So thankful for Richard in Markland. So thankful for Sandra and her group, because this is the fruits of their labor. We would not be here if not for them. My question on behalf of them, and the fact that I live under that busy runway, why did you not support the idea of a full curfew? Thank you.
Okay, so the issue of the curfew, there's a lot of devil in the detail about the curfews, which we didn't touch on, and it's not necessarily all that it first appears to be. So that's one thing which we're conscious of. I guess the issue is we're trying to make recommendations for the GTA to put in their noise action plan, and we are trying to be mindful of the fact that there is a balance to be struck effectively between the negative impact on communities and the economic value and the demand for travel which drives the flights in the nighttime period. So it's very tough for us in that sort of situation to recommend something which another airport has never actually unilaterally undertaken in the context of a study to feed into a noise action plan.
Next question's over here. Introduce yourself, please, and the community you're from. It's on. It's on.
My name is Caroline. I'm from Long Branch area. I'm a homeowner there. Manny has already expressed many of my concerns, but I'd also like to express my concerns about procurement. Air procurement, whatever you call it, whatever it is. I know with that procurement that it doesn't just cover air noise or air expansion, it covers our homes as well. I don't want to lose my home because GTAA wants to expand their airport on my land. I'm Canadian, I'm an Ontarian, I'm a Torontonian, I pay my taxes. Don't take my land because you want to expand. Thank you.
Okay, that's been recorded. Next question's over here. Introduce yourself, please, and community you're from.
I'm from the Leaside Property Owners Association, an executive member of TANG and a former co-chair of TANG, and I'd like to thank Tina, I guess she's probably already left, for... Oh, good. Well, thank you very much for thanking all of these groups, including ours, for the hard work that we've done over the last 5 years, working with 3 different transport ministers, briefing the mayor, arranging councillor coalitions downtown, talking to our MPs and our MPPs. I see the fruits of our labors. 5 long years, but as I drove out here tonight and spoke to Hillary just before everyone started to present, we have come a long way in 5 years. They are listening, they have invested. These things are going through now after the 5 years. Let's wait and see what some of these final things have to say. I live on the east side of Toronto. I'm over 20 kilometers away from the airport. And for those of you who are wondering why would you possibly be here, it's because our south downwind leg is exactly the same as yours, at exactly the same altitude. Yes, yes it is. Yes it is. Yes it is. The flights fly over my home at 2400.
Let her finish.
If you were at the Helios presentation and if you understand what an arrival route looks like, the downwind leg has specific altitudes, and I get flights at 2,400 feet on the downwind leg. The final approach is 1,000.
Excuse me.
Let me ask my question. I'll let the technical people explain that to you. But that's why I'm here, because as hard as it is for you to believe, we get the same noise. And I also want you well, then you would be on the final approach. Yeah, and there are people in my area that are in the final approach, but that's not me. My questions are...
Excuse me, let her ask her question.
My questions are to the Helios folks. When you talk about alternating runways and you're speaking about summertime, I'd like you to define summertime. May 1st to September 1st, July 1st to October 1st, July, August. That's my first question. And my second question was with regard to restricted hours and the night flight budget that you have at the GTAA through Transport Canada, signed by the Transport Minister. I'm wondering if, and I'm guessing, that there is no minimum per hour required over the course of a night flight restriction, meaning it's quite possible, and I think it was happening during perhaps some trials that you were having over the course of the summer, that it's quite possible that if 45 average flights are going through Toronto at night, can you stack them at one end, meaning it can be extended from 12:30 to 1:30 to be even longer, and that you can prop them up and stack them at the 5:30 end, meaning my actual sleep hours during restricted hours become smaller.
Okay, we've got the question. Just have a response.
I will come back on your first point. The definition of summer is the summer scheduling season, which the aviation industry works to. It's generally consistent with summertime. Oh, specific.
Sorry, so Rini, I think you're talking about Idea 5, which is the summer weekend runway alternation, and I think it's from the beginning of May to mid-October. That's how we're defining summer. With respect to...
Let's not interrupt the response. You've asked a question, let have the response, please.
With respect to your question about night flights, yeah, that's a good question, and I think that that's somewhat what Helios meant when they made the recommendation around extending some restrictions, not necessarily a flight restriction, but extending some restriction. There's some parameters in those shoulder hours and what that needs to look like. And so that's definitely something we have to look at, because I think that's a fair observation.
Okay, next question. I'm going to remind you, 2 minutes, please. So we have lots of questions. Let's get through them all. So 2 minutes.
My name is Mark Lipchuk, and I live in the Centennial Park area. I have a question of credibility. How can you believe what these people say? I was told by Robin Connolly at the last meeting that she'd get back to me on an issue. That was several months ago, and this is an ongoing issue I've had with the GTAA since back in February. Total silence. I've tried multiple times to get in touch with them. Nothing. She promises to get back. Nothing. And I don't even want to hear your response. I just say that's an indication of your credibility.
So let's not have personal attacks here, please.
No, look, you are employed by the GTAA. I don't appreciate this new format of CENAC meetings where you get to defend
Do you have a question?
The people who pay you.
Do you have a question?
Yeah, I have lots of questions. First of all, I have an issue with the use of the north-south runways. Forget about changing the preferential runway policy. You're already violating it. You lie and you tell people that you're using the 15L runway because it's the longest. It's not. 0523 is the longest. So don't give me this BS about how people have to use it because it's the longest runway. Going a further level down, next you're going to tell me, no, it's the takeoff run available. I looked at the NAV Canada Canadian airport charts, and there's not that much of a difference. You're telling me 100-foot difference is going to make a difference for the pilot about what runway he takes? BS. Also, 21st of September, 2:17 in the morning. What about that? There was a flight using 15L, and there was a wind from the north. So it was departing into a tailwind. Anyone want to explain that? Or how about 13th September at 17:03, an A320, which is not exactly a large aircraft, was going to LA. LA is not that far, but it also has to use 15L. You want to explain that? Oh, and here's a good thing. You keep saying that these Asian-bound flights have to use 15L because of the length of the flight and the fuel they carry and so on and so on. Well, just recently, on the 25th of September, you used 15R, which is one of the shortest runways. And you had the flights going to Jeddah and Korea and one in China. And these flights on previous days had to use 15L. But all of a sudden, they could use the shortest runway. You know, no credibility, no integrity.
Thank you, Mr. Lipchuk, for your observations and your comments. I think I can't address everyone individually, but certainly would add some context into the requirements for runway selection. Certainly the length, the destination that the aircraft is using, but another consideration that they do input into their considerations is that of obstacles off the end of runways. And certainly obstacles off the end of runway 33 right do lead in many cases for the use of 15 left over 33 right. And same thing for runway 23. There are obstacles off the end of runway 23, which we certainly have all of that information available, Mr. Lipchuk. We can have that discussion with you.
Okay, just so you're aware, there's not really a speakers list line here. It is really, we're going to go back and forth. So if you want to sit down, Kathy can come to you in order and get to you in order if you want to sit down and take your time. Is there any questions at the far side? We're going back and forth, side to side, and we don't need to have a speakers list. She can make a list. So next person, please.
Yes, my name is George Hamilton. And first, I missed the opening, but I'm not sure who you're working for, as they said. You should not be giving any comments on what either side if you are a true moderator in this session.
I don't get your point. I'm a neutral moderator here tonight. I don't get your point.
You've been making specific comments that seem to be on the airport side.
I haven't made any comments. I'm not sure you're talking about.
I've heard what you said, sir. Okay? I'm going to try to get through my number of questions here, if possible. First of all, there's reference been made to curfews. Pearson Airport did actually have a curfew in the 1970s. If you get the old Canada Air pilots, you will find there was a curfew between midnight and 7 a.m. I do happen to know because I worked at the airport from 1989 till 2009. Secondly, the comment about the cargo flights. I noticed on your fact sheet here the reference to 18 dedicated cargo planes land at Toronto Pearson each day. So I'm assuming if that says 18 arrivals, there's 18 departures as well, is that correct? Or is that 18 total flights? I couldn't hear the answer.
Total flights, George.
So that is incorrect the way it's worded there then. And how many of those operate during the restricted hours on a daily basis?
George, our stats indicate that of our night flights, approximately 13% are cargo related.
I asked how many daily operations are cargo flights. You're saying here there's 18 in the whole day. How many of them are at night? At least 6 are by FedEx.
George, I'm hearing approximately 6. We can get you the actual stats.
Okay, so they're all FedEx aircraft then, correct? Or maybe someone can get back to me later
Sure,
on
we
that.
can get that to you, George.
Okay. Next. Sorry. Again, talking about the restrictions on night flight operations. In the early 1990s, when the airport was operated by Transport Canada, there were proposals for the expansion of the restricted hour period. However, it also should be thought of that at that time, the aircraft that did operate during the restricted hours were probably about 75% operational requirements due to delays en route or delays with baggage handling, etc., whereas currently the majority of aircraft are actually scheduled within the restricted hours. When the airport authority did take over the airport, those hours were then reduced down to the midnight 30 to 6:30 hours.
Can you wrap it up, please? There's a lot of questions, and there's only 25 minutes left.
What's my time limit right now? Am I
You're over the 2 minutes, so there's
Okay.
lots of questions.
Thank you very much, sir. And is there an answer? Do anybody want to confirm or deny that comment I just made?
Maybe repeat the question.
I was not asking a question. I was stating what I believe are facts, that in the early 1990s, the majority of aircraft operations during the restricted period were operational requirements, aircraft operating on extensions into the restricted hours. Currently, the majority of aircraft are scheduled in the restricted hours. Answer to that question?
George, approximately 78% of the flights within the restricted hours are scheduled flights. That's correct.
In the current time?
In the current plan, that's correct.
Yes. Somebody could possibly get back with a look at the activity in, let's say, 1990 as to the number of operations that the night restriction cap or quota is based on, and the number of operations at that time that were extensions as opposed to scheduled flights.
Next question on this side over here. Introduce yourself, community you're from, please.
Roberto Gonzalez. My wife and I, we live in the Centennial Park area. The last meeting I attended was at Silverton Collegiate. You know, we had all the representatives of provincial representative, federal, municipal. I don't see anybody here.
No, they are here.
Okay. The question is, one of the questions, you know, I don't understand. You're making comparison. You went all over to find the airport. This is Canada. This is Toronto. We have the same area as United States, but we have about 1/10 of the population. Why do we have to crowd everything in Toronto? What about our neighboring area? Hamilton, I know it benefits you, okay? That's your corporation. I thought at the last meeting, the question was that the federal government representatives were trying to see, can we expand, or at least can we take this overflow maybe into Hamilton or some other adjoining areas? We talk about Europe. Europe is so close. They have to do what they have to do. We don't have to crowd this. And you don't have all this aggravation from all people here. Okay? Things have changed. We don't need that. And next time you have a meeting, I like to see representative there, because I know you're trying to, you're trying to feather your cap and you have personal interest in it. All of us are coming here basically because we have homes, we have interest, and we want to make sure our community is safe. As has been pointed, there are a lot of schools, there are a lot of, and every time, you don't know nowadays, all of a sudden, 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning, you see all this aircraft. This has got to be controlled. It is madness. We have so much room in this country that we shouldn't have any patience to do this type of problem.
I know they wouldn't want me to speak on their behalf, but last night up in Ottawa, we did have a briefing with a number of elected officials, MPs, and they are deeply interested in this issue and interested in representing their constituents. So I don't want you to think that because they're not here, they're not interested in that. They were briefed last night. I'm sure they're probably watching online. Perhaps some of their staff are here in the room, but they are deeply interested in this issue.
Next question over here, please. Introduce yourself.
I'm Leo Samuelewski. Sorry?
Okay, we'll come to you next.
Oh, sorry.
We'll come to you next. We didn't hear you. Let's go to this person here.
Okay, again, Leo Samuelewski. I'm just south of Centennial Park. Gerald, first of all, I'd like to apologize to Helios for my standing up and outburst, but I don't apologize to the GTAA. And Gerald, it's already been touched tonight about Silver Star and Collegiate. There was a meeting that was by GTA at the end of June, and they canceled about an hour and a half before it happened. Now, when I look at respect, and this is why I'm apologizing to Helios and saying, I respect the gentleman, I expect respect turned back to me the same way. But when you listen to what people are saying, 7 times, or with the gentleman across the hall saying for a response and hasn't got one, it doesn't give you comfort that they're taking this wholeheartedly. And also at the same time, I wrote a letter, and, geez, I think I have people on the other end that work for the government, and since I worked there, that's a bad comment to say, but we had standards. What are yours? And Hillary, I gotta say this, I have to thank you for saying about safety, because one of the bugaboos that I have with the GTA is called pollution. And maybe you can explain this, because in your annual reports for the 14th and 15th and 16th, you're talking about carbon dioxide, which is a very bad side effect from, as we know, can kill people. And the airport quality manual, that's that IACAO, I may be saying it wrong, says that should be only 35, whatever, I'm not going to go into the legally, but let's say parts per hour. Yet in your own, sorry, when I mean own, that's the GTAA annual report, it's showing 6,671 units of carbon dioxide. Now, I can go on the other side and say what carbon dioxide does to people. And this reminds me what happened in the spring when you sprung that great noise on us people are using the south runway. There was a lot of planes, a lot of pollution, and we all breathe that. And so, end of the day, there are health issues. In my comment on that, it reminds me, I think it came out from the Vietnam War, collateral damage.
Do you have a specific question?
Yes, I will, in 1 second. The collateral damage is people, and GTAA is ignoring the people's wishes. And as I said once before, all you guys are looking for is to let us sound off, and we will go and do our own thing. People have already talked about night flights, switching lanes. It's not going to happen. You'll take the recommendations from Helios and say, by the way, doesn't suit us, we'll go ahead. Final comment. If I was a shareholder, I'd be annoyed because I researched a lot of this stuff on the internet, and you paid Helios, they're happy, they got the money. You people have a lot to learn still.
Okay, thank you for that comment. Next question over here.
Thanks very much.
Introduce yourself, please, and what community you're from.
I had to stand up first because I'm really short. My name is Kathleen Olden Powell, and I live in Alderwood, which is south of the airport, about 8 miles. I think I actually checked the mileage between the intersection of Browns Line and Evans Avenue and the airport. As one of the things I wanted to ask about was it's kind of a sort of a 3-part question that's wrapped in a riddle. First, my thanks about the comment at the beginning about the letter has gone to Health Canada requesting information and an update on that. And so my first question then is, do we have any idea when we might get a reply from them? Or is it whenever they decide that they have the time and energy to get themselves around to that?
I don't have an answer to that, but it is available online, and if you wanted to support the letter and write to Health Canada, I'm sure that would be welcome. I will note, Hillary mentioned that we were briefing elected officials last night up in Ottawa, and we did bring that up, and that was of interest to them as well.
Okay, thank you for that. So the question then is, as we, and I was at the launch of the report last week, the Helios report, and so hearing the suggestions around decreasing noise, and you've mentioned that the A320 baffling system to be put into effect. I recall in the Helios report, it's 1 in 5 planes, I think, that come through Pearson is an A320. Please correct me if I'm wrong. My memory doesn't always stand up well. So if that's the case, then that's great. That'll be 20% of the planes that we'll get rid of the whine, but then there's still the other noise, and there's the other 80% of the planes. So it's, a step, but in the big picture, when looking at best practice, and my background is in healthcare, so we come back to best practice and come back to best practice and evidence. And I've not heard of there being much direct link drawn between the health effects that we keep raising. You have written off to Health Canada to ask for another health report. The City of Toronto issued in April of this year a fabulous report on noise and the impacts on health in the City of Toronto. And it's all kinds of noise, but it does directly deal with traffic noise and specifically aircraft noise and the health issues around that. Coming back to Helios then, when looking at best practice and looking at, so best practice in noise reduction, for example, includes baffling the A320s, includes changing the angle that planes are coming in on, which, by the way, anything coming from the south, as I understand from my question last week, and I went back at home and mapped everything out, that's not going to help anybody south of the lake because we're outside of the distance that the planes are above 3,000 feet. And once they're below 3,000 feet, which is us, it's not going to help, as I understand from the Helios fellow, I'm sorry, names elude me, who spoke last week. So if you can speak to...
Do you have a question?
Yes.
Okay.
In the Helios, looking at best practices and looking at these measures and saying, yes, they're going to reduce noise, but is there anything else in that milieu that directly links these things, because I feel like they're still standing as two separate silos.
Can I just address quickly?
So introduce yourself, Michelle. Oh, yeah.
That constant descent arrival recommendation that you referred to. So there was two things in the Helios report to us. One was some specific steps that they recommended to increase constant descent arrivals, and that is largely focused on above 3,000 feet because aircraft are in a constant descent below 3,000 feet today. But there is another recommendation in there that for some of the approaches, we at least investigate increasing the angle of the approach to 3.2 degrees from 3.3 degrees, which it is today, and that would make the aircraft a little higher even in the final approach segment.
Any other question?
With regard to the connection between the health and the sort of noise management activities, it's an interesting question. There's quite a lot of research still going on. It's quite clear that there's been demonstrated the links between noise exposure and health. I think the actual science isn't there yet to make the firm connection between the practical actions that get taken. So at the moment, the approach is to try and do as much as possible to just reduce the noise levels, particularly to try and reduce awakenings at night, for example. All of those factors. The push is just for airports to try and pull all the levers they have to reduce noise as much as they practically can. And we don't have a sort of, you pull this handle and this is the health impact, yet the science just doesn't support it.
So we have just over 10 minutes left, and we're not going to get to all your questions. So keep your questions brief and keep the responses brief. Let's go here. Questions brief. Introduce yourself, please. We're going to come over to you next. We're coming to you next. So we're going to this person. Please introduce yourself.
My name is Ruth Mary James. I live in the Alderwood area. Our family's been in that area for over 60 years. My concern is the noise, the pollution, and the more planes coming into Pearson International Airport. With the number of planes that are going to be coming in the next 20 years, I just don't know what's going to happen. I'm sick of the noise, and nothing ever gets done. And I was wanting to go to the Helios. My computer's down. I phoned up the GTAA and spoke to a lady there. I've got her name. I think it's Catherine. And I said to her, I'd like to go to the Helios meeting. And she says, well, we'll see if you can go. Well, she went off and then came back. She says, no, it's full, over 1,000 people. Plus, it's at one of the airports where you have to pay $9. Why would Helios go to a place where people have to pay $9? Then I got so ticked off I wasn't able to go. I phoned over to England and found out, I got on my computer on my internet because my email's not working and so forth, and I found the phone number and I phoned over to England and nobody got back to me. Does GTA and all the people that are associated with the airport not communicate with each other? We do need another airport. I've lived here 60 years. I just see more and more coming in. I go to Shareway. I was there today, and there was one so low and so noisy. You just look up, and it's terrible. Politicians, it's great they're getting involved now. All the politicians, election time's coming. We need something done now, not 5 years from now. I'm just sick of politics. All it does is go around in a circle. All we do is waste our time. I've come to all the meetings, and another question I have, where is the CEO of GTAA? Every time I come, he's never here. So is he scared of us? What is the problem? Why does he not come? I've lived in Toronto. I was born in Toronto. I'm starting to I hate living in southern Etobicoke.
Okay, thank you.
The plane's coming over, and then in the summertime, I had one flying over at 11 o'clock at night that scared the living poop out of me.
Okay, thank you for that.
The planes, it's not changing. All this is talk, talk, talk. I'm sick of the governments, all the politicians, whether they're municipal, federal, are provincial, they get involved when it's election time.
There's
and
other
I'm
people
sick of
with
it.
questions. Other people with questions. Do you want to? Next question, right here.
Thank you. I will just to the residents' question. Where is the CEO tonight?
So, CENAC, historically, I come to these meetings, I meet with the community, that's my responsibility. I sit on the management team, and I take back a full report to Howard on what goes on at these meetings.
But with all due respect, this has been raised a number of times by CENAC members and residents as to having the CEO in attendance. And this would be a meeting that I think would be most appropriate to have the CEO here. That wasn't on the top of my list of questions. So good evening, everyone. My name is Chris Fonseca. I'm a city councillor in the city of Mississauga. I do sit on CENAC, and I have some questions and comments. My first question was, did you present or have you presented to MPs and the minister? You have answered that, but I'll just make a comment that, and this has come up by CENAC and the CENAC committee, Wednesday meetings for elected officials, and I'm not making this up as an excuse, myself, the Brampton councillor, Toronto councillors, we have council on Wednesdays. MPPs, I believe, are in session. I don't know about all of them in night sittings, and of course MPs are in Ottawa. So Helios and the GTAA could have made this meeting on a Friday, on a Saturday, on a Sunday. I know the community could have come out. That would allow all the elected officials to be in the room. A question with regards to, so that question was answered, but just with regards to, back to the curfew, which I'm in full support of, a night curfew, an actual period of time where there are no flights. Did you actually consider the noise monitor data when you put forward that recommendation? Did you actually look at that data?
No, frankly.
So with all due respect, with all due respect, the decibel readings on, and now I haven't gone through every single noise monitoring system that is in place, but I can tell you that the decibel readings in the night, in the middle of night, in a number of the locations, the decibel readings are 70, 75, 79, 80 decibel readings on an ongoing basis through the night. So I think that would have been something that you would want to consider when you're looking at recommending not having a curfew in place at all. So my next question is, the shoulder hours. Why did you gloss over these shoulder hours in your recommendations? And I'll tell you why. When I first got onto CENAC in 2010, when I was first elected, sitting on CENAC at the time, the GTA was looking at a pilot to have early turn prop planes flying in the community in these shoulder hours in the morning. So not only are there no nighttime restrictions, because as you've already admitted to, the airport operates 24/7, but also the shoulder hours basically is a continuation. So from 6:30 in the morning until normal daytime operations, this pilot was introduced. And it's quite disappointing and frustrating that you've pretty much glossed over these shoulder hours in this presentation. So if you could answer that, that would be wonderful.
Okay, so I don't think discussing the shoulder hours was in any way an attempt to gloss over them. We've basically suggested that management of night noise should be expanded at Pearson, and that could include the addition of shoulder hours if necessary. I mean, shoulder hours traditionally are a more demanding period than daytime, but not necessarily as demanding as the night. So a starting position would be to try and operate the most demanding conditions for the longest period possible. And then if there were challenges in doing that, then to focus on the shoulder hours. But I don't think we've intentionally intended to gloss over them in any shape or form.
Okay, I think that's something that has to be looked at. I mean, those shoulder hours they basically just run right into the nighttime hours. And again, like with regards to this pilot, it now is my understanding, a normal procedure that's just put in place with these early term procedures, and they are in the shoulder hours.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. There's lots of questions. It's up to the audience. There's less than 5.
Just 2 more
There's
comments.
less than 5 minutes left.
2 more comments.
Do you want to eat up the 5 minutes?
I'll be really
Go ahead.
quick. 2 more comments quickly. Number 1, I'm quite disappointed in the GTAA, and hopefully this will come up at the next meeting in a 5-year timeline. Hillary, I'm glad and appreciative that you announced about the A320 simple win. I think that could have been implemented in the previous 5 years, but I think the 5-year timeline is far too long in terms of implementing any of the recommendations. And next thing, I represent the City of Mississauga and the Region of Peel on the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. I personally am totally opposed to the privatization of the airport. I will be bringing forward to the City of Mississauga and the Region of Peel a motion to that effect. And I would like all of you to know in this room that this is an issue right across the country. The Federation of Canadian Municipalities represents over 2,700 communities in the city, in the country. We passed a motion called Municipal Consultation on Ownership Changes to Canada's Airports. We just did this less than 2 weeks ago at our board meeting, and this was passed unanimously across the country. Whereas the recent media reports indicate that the Government of Canada is actively considering the privatization of Canada's airports in order to achieve a one-time financial windfall, and the plan may be formalized in the upcoming federal budget, whereas the airports are part of the core economies of municipalities, including tourism, but also social infrastructure of every municipal community and budget and consultation process. Therefore, be it resolved that the Federation of Canadian Municipalities immediately call on the Government of Canada to consult with Canadian local governments and other stakeholders before making any ownership changes in Canada's airports, and to develop, and sorry, it's very small font, an air transport policy that reflects the true needs and mitigations and aspirations of Canadian communities. And I'll leave my other comments for another time. Thank you.
We have time for, we're going to go to the far side of the room for a question. Introduce yourself, please.
Thomas from Markland Woods. I'll keep it short. 2 questions. We heard from your presentation about preferential runways and the priority in which those get determined. And what I heard was that safety is still the #1 priority over and above any of the other criteria. So do we have an assertion that today's standards of safety and the criteria that are used to define what safety is will continue to be the #1 priority, regardless of whether we're talking night flights, preferential runway, weekend sharing, any of that sort of stuff? So that's question 1. Question 2 is you made a reference to the fact that your report that you presented tonight, slideshow was slightly different from what the material was handed out. Where do we get the complete report that has all of the recommendations? Because you've indicated this has some of the proposals and recommendations. There may be the odd skeptic in the crowd, just saying, that might be interested in seeing what all of them are. Those are my 2 questions.
Thanks for your questions, Mr. Kadelka. Certainly safety is #1 at the airport and how the airport operates, and we do not waver on safety. No, safety is #1.
Excuse me. Excuse me. Excuse me. Excuse me. Excuse me. Excuse me. Let him respond. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
And safety is number one, and the report is already, it's available now online. The full, so you'll see the executive summary, which we handed out today, the full report with all the recommendations, and then in addition, there's the appendix, which summarizes all of the research.
Okay, we're at 8:30. I have time for one last question, and then we're going to adjourn the meeting. So we're going to go right to this person here. Please introduce yourself.
My name is, am I on? My name is Dave Street. I live in Rockwood. I'm the fifth last house when the planes land or take off on L33, known as the illegal runway. When it was put in 25 years ago, reports, all surveys said it shouldn't be there. You went ahead and built it. Anyway, when you did this, Hillary, maybe you're not listening. It doesn't sound like it to me. When you did put this runway in, there was an agreement that would be 5% of the planes only using L33. Are you going to continue to stay with this agreement, or do your plans say that you're going to increase that immensely? That's number one. Number two is, as far as noise is concerned, when my house is less than 2 miles away, the planes come in anywhere from 300 to 500 feet. I'm not sure what planet that lady was on that said the noise is the same at 2,500 feet, but maybe she should come and sit in my backyard. She will find out quickly what air noise is all about. And as I said, my house was here before that illegal runway was put in. My second question is in regard to the charges and fines for night noise. You said that you do fine planes. Where does this money go? Who sets the fines? And you said that you have fines and you put it back in the community. Can you tell me exactly where you have done this? Because nobody's come knocking at my door saying they want to put more insulation or new windows or anything in, so I'd be very interested to see where this money is gone. And thirdly, after the last Helios meeting, the only one I guess, the next day you conveniently ran your planes taking off, landing on L33. I phoned, they said, I'm sorry, we cannot respond because I asked for a response. We have too many complaints. We cannot. Last night, I got a response from your people, which is well over a week from my complaint went in. So my question to you, do you understand what people are talking about when they say we have a lot of complaints, we don't like what you're doing, we don't want night flights, and we want you to not have any more flights at all? There's only one way to reduce noise over my place, from what you people tell me, is make sure there's no more than 5% of the planes running there. So let me know what you think.
Go ahead. Introduce yourself first.
Hi, I'm Greg Nickel from Transport Canada, and I'd like to speak to the violations and the fines that are put on by Transport Canada. Part of the ground lease, the day-to-day operations were transferred to the GTAA, and part of that, they forward us any violations to their noise abatement procedures. We enforce those noise abatement procedures through the Canadian aviation regulations, and fines are administered to violating companies. Those fines can range anywhere from $5,000 to $25,000 depending on the number of occurrences.
Do you know how much?
I can't speak to the specific amount. I can only give you what a fine would be. The fines are available in general provisions.
Okay, let's. There's been agreement. Do we have agreement to continue this meeting until 9 o'clock? Okay, 9 o'clock. Stop. So that means if we want to get to all these questions, you're going to have to be brief with your questions and brief with your responses. So please be brief. Introduce yourself.
Testing, testing.
Okay, hello, how are you?
5%. Okay, we'll get there.
I'm happy to. So, you know, I would characterize our approach on the north-south runway usage and keeping it about 5% as a willingness on our part to balance community concerns with the operations. That said, today there's a need to reflect on the usage of the north-south runway based on broader community concerns. And so we are reviewing,
let her respond.
As part of Ideas 5 and 6, Idea 5, we're looking at weekend runway alternation, doing the technical analysis.
Let the response.
We'll be posting that information hopefully before the end of the year and consulting in 2018.
If you're going to do this, how are you going to compensate us?
So, sorry, beg your
What are you going to do to compensate us if you're going to, you arbitrarily say you're going to change the 5%? What are you going to do to compensate the people that you're insulting?
So, as you saw in the Helios best practices research, insulation is something that airports around the world use, and so we're going to take a closer look at that as part of our noise management plan.
How close?
Okay, before we continue, let's review the ground rules. One speaker at a time, please. Let the questioner with the microphone ask the question and let the response continue without heckling. Can we continue that way, please? Next question.
Test, am I on? Yeah, very good. This is so complicated, and it's clearly, we've got a serious management problem. I mean, the airport is fundamental to the strength and vitality of our community as it's growing, but at the same time, it's just not functioning as well as it could. And here we have good people. They're all existing residents. Guess what? We've got 3 million more people coming over the next 30 years. This book is talking to that, and it's provincial policy, and it's talking about high density development, most of it along these various flight routes that are being proposed. I'm very, very deeply concerned that land use planning and its future implications have not been included in any of this work in terms of Helios, for example, because of noise impact on all of these people. With that said, I mean, I want to turn to a guiding principle in the Helios report, which astounded me, and I don't know, I'm scanning this report, trying to understand it, and I certainly will in the future. They indicate the Canadian border. It's important to note and remit Canadian authorities extends to the Canadian border. Of course it does. Because the U.S. border and hence U.S. jurisdiction lies only a few kilometers from the southern shore of Toronto, a few kilometers? It's 24 kilometers at its closest point, and it's about 60 at its widest point. And I believe that this guiding principle, as it's interpreted here, may have been a major factor in recommendations, and I think this needs to be revisited and look at the Lake Ontario as a potential route to help with the management of aircraft noise, and perhaps even the Rouge Valley as they swing around. The other interesting point is there's no reference to the airport master plan. The airport master plan, as I recall, is mandated and it's due. It's overdue. It's 10 years. And I'd like to hear some information on the timing and the content of that plan, because there's also no reference to the 6th runway. The 6th runway, it's an east-west runway at the north, and it's included in the current airport zoning regulations. And I'm just astounded that all of these facts are not clearly articulated in these reports that are guiding the future of airspace management, regulation, and the eventual noise that gets to people and the level of annoyance that they experience. Thank you.
I think I'll address, I'll address your first comment there, because I think that's the Helios report that was done for NAV Canada that you're referring to. They did indicate some constraints around airspace changes that would require corresponding airspace changes in U.S. airspace. I don't think that ended up being a major constraint in any of their work. There is a section in the report where they were clearly asked by the community to examine the location of the downwind portion of the flight path over the lake, and there's a lengthy section there in which they explore that issue, and the constraint of U.S. airspace really wasn't a factor in any of that discussion. What was the other?
Sorry, so you were asking about the master plan. The master plan is a document that looks at a 20-year time horizon, looks at the forecast in terms of regional growth and demand, and then the onus is on us to develop a response in terms of how we're going to manage the airport and its operations to respond to that growth forecast. We are coming up to the submission in early December of this year of that document. The minister receives that document, specifically the land use plan, and our commitment is to bring it forward, discuss it with the community, share it with stakeholders, and we have been doing that. We started back in the summer, sharing aspects of the forecast and the growth that we're expecting. As well, for the previous 3 years, we've been out talking about various specific aspects of the growth, air traffic, how we can work with other airports in Southern Ontario, ground transportation, bringing a transit center to Toronto Pearson, connecting all the transit lines in the region to that transit center, and of course, looking at additional uses of the land, the airport land. And so if you haven't had a chance to look at that document, it is on our website, the executive summary of it. You can find that on the torontopearson.com website. And if you looked at it in terms of the land use plan, you'd see that while providing for a 6th runway, we don't believe we have the need to introduce a 6th runway in that horizon. And the only other major change on that front would be the addition, in terms of the land use plan, would be the addition of that transit center, as I mentioned.
Sorry, just a quick supplementary on that. Would not the addition of the 6th runway at that location allow for better management of aircraft arriving? They wouldn't have to use the urban areas. They would be in the northern areas and then be able to go with downwind, base, and final in that direction, as opposed to doing the downwind base over highly dense populated areas.
Well, before I turn the mic over to Mike here, on additional runway and configuration, I would just say that if you look at a map of the Greater Toronto Area, there is very little industrial or green space over which to fly, and Nav Canada could probably speak to that, as they've been considering ideas 1 through 6 in terms of what could be the ideal routing to mitigate noise impacts for aircraft traveling over the city. So they have been considering ways to provide respite.
Okay, thank you. 8:45. Over to this far side. Introduce yourself, please, and let's keep it brief. I think we have enough time if we can keep it brief.
Hi, I'm an unidentified resident from Halton. I'm basically speaking here to Greg. Greg, I don't consider this a CENAC meeting. When my elected officials are in the audience and not up there, CENAC is a failed process. This whole process is failed. Items are not solved at the local level, nor have they been solved for years. Government intervention is required. There were a number of follow-up and action items on the previous CENAC meeting when it was rescheduled to the service building. So I'm looking for follow-up to that. This is not an appropriate CENAC meeting when, again, my councillors are sort of gagged, limited on what they are, and particularly when they sit on CENAC, that they're in this audience and instead of up there and setting the agenda. Please, again, no mega hub, no funding, no to privatization. We have demonstrated here that this is not working for years. This is out of control. As mentioned before, people in my town, my region, and my neighbors, other than the airport, are being abused, they are being harassed, they are being assaulted. And unlike the Helios review says, I will clearly say, we are not become acclimatizing to this. We are not getting used to the noise. We are not getting used to the emissions and the health concerns that are here. Transport Canada, as it says here, I guess they talk about the fact check, about how there's an agreement or they must work with the federal government or insist that they grow. Transport Canada, you have an obligation to me and the people in this room here to ensure that our health, our safety, our well-being, no matter where we live in the GTA, whether we be 3 kilometers away, whether we be 20 kilometers away, are protected. We have been neglected, we have been abused, we have been harassed, and we need your help. This is beyond a nuisance. We are in a crisis and have been for years. We have been asking for help. And it's a good sign when I call the transport office that it's busy, but I'm not too sure if they've just taken the phone off the hook with all the calls that are coming in. Please, a night flight ban that it comes into effect at least at 11 p.m. I am on the preferential runway, as that other lady said here. I get departures and arrivals. I live 20 plus kilometers away, and I have flights that are under 3,000 feet with an elevation of the town that is over 800 feet above sea level. Please, the federal government does need to protect residents of here. The Helios review was heavily restrained, did not address the major items that were addressed by the public. There were over 36 items and less than about 6 were addressed. ICAO standard does not work in Canada. We cannot accommodate what is here. We cannot accommodate these standards, and Transport Canada needs to feed back up to ICAO that it doesn't work, and we need either exemptions or positive other ways here. Flight paths and waypoints can move. NAV Canada has demonstrated that they can safely move aircraft away from residential areas even during peak hours. But yet they have demonstrated that they continue to increase the amount of flights and the intensity. It has gotten worse as I continue to come to these meetings. 300 plus in 24 hours. Over 25 of the 50 average night flights come through my area, and they are targeting a needle in a haystack.
Do you have a question you're going to get to? Or
Yes, I'm looking for a follow-up of why NAV Canada does not respond to ticket requests, emails in a timely fashion, why the only thing that they process fast enough is a credit card receipt for the Canada Air Pilot Guide, why Jonathan and Tracy do not return phone calls and Rudy walks away from people at the Helios review, and why we continue to get abused and harassed here. So I'm looking for a follow-up from Transport Canada on what is being done to protect us, what is going to be done to either pull away the ground lease here, and why Mr. Garneau is not present at these meetings, and why certain staff here get flown to Ottawa, but the representation is not here. So it's a two-part question. I'm looking for feedback from Transport Canada on action items from the previous CENAC meeting. And part two, I'm looking for NAV Canada to respond here because it's been indicated by Helios and my NAV Canada staff that it is completely possible to avoid my area, and the downward leg can in fact move over Lake Ontario and not over my residents and friends to the south in Oakville. ICAO is not working here. Transport Canada, what are you doing to support us? And there is a supplementary.
You've used up your time, so we'll go to those responses to those two, please.
Yes, so for your action items, I'm not sure what exactly you're referring to. I believe your frustration with the communication process, which has been communicated back to Transport Canada officials.
Let him finish his response, please.
Well, my understanding is that the minutes were recorded and typed, and I've not seen the minutes from the previous meeting published on the website. So I came here to the meeting without the appropriate information, and I'm going to guess that that was not forwarded to you either. But it's been over a month since the previous CENAC meeting. And there was documentation there. So yes, go ahead.
I can't speak specifically what you're referring to because I'm not sure. I can say that to touch on your point of the night budget, this is an agreement that was set out in the land agreement when we transferred the airport over to the GTAA, and that's a standing agreement.
And NAV Canada, you had a response?
That's not an answer to the questions.
Happy to, and we've spoken before, so I'm familiar with your concern area. You mentioned the needle in a haystack, and I know exactly what you mean for your neighborhood. I can say that we've been working very hard on the 6 ideas with GTAA, particularly idea number 1, which is altered flight paths for night arrivals. We've been in the design process and have been doing noise modeling on those, and we'll be coming forward to the community this fall. We are prepared to move waypoints, as you said, for night arrivals. When the traffic volume is lower, we have alternatives, and we have different ways that we can manage those traffic flows coming in. Right now at night, they use the same flight paths as they do during the day, and we've been looking very hard at alternative ways to come in a more noise-sensitive way, and I think you'll be pleased when you see them.
And the minutes from last meeting, I think, are they online? Yeah, they are online. The minutes from last meeting are online. So we have 10 minutes left. Let's go to the next question, please. Your response. Next question, please.
My name is John Doherty. Is this on?
It's on.
And I'm Fleetwood Village, but I'm also a member of the Canadian Alliance for Air Safety. Now, Pearson's a good airport, but it's flawed. It's a handicapped airport. It has limitations. It has a very unusual runway configuration, and not all the runways can be used in all directions at any given time. Now, you've already admitted that there were problems with certain flights not being able to use other runways because of obstacles or obstructions. The problem is that it's basically a flawed designed airport with a limitation. And you guys are trying to tell me that in the future, we will have millions more movements, and we're just going to continue going like this until something serious happens. And I'm talking about air safety now. It's really a flawed. Will anyone up there admit that there are design flaws at Pearson?
I guess I'll start by saying that you just said millions more movements. That's not true.
No, it's an exaggeration.
Our movements will grow over the next 20 years at about 1.4%, 1.5%, and that's on average, and that's in line with the region's growth.
Yeah.
So,
okay. Let her respond, please. Let her finish her response.
Most importantly, I want to address your safety concerns. We are regulated by Transport Canada. They audit our operations. We are a safe airport.
Now.
Absolutely safe. So I just want to be very clear about that fact. If you've got concerns about safety, Transport Canada audits us. We work when there are investigations by the Transport Safety Board. We work very closely with them to address any concerns. So I can't abide by any allegations that we are unsafe.
I didn't say you're presently unsafe. I said that there's a flaw in the design of Pearson that limits its usage in the future. When that future will arrive, we don't know, but you're predicting, well, here.
We just won't operate unsafely, so
I
don't know what you're...
Millions of passengers.
Millions of passengers, yes.
And thousands more aircraft movements. If you do the math and work it out, how many minutes or how many movements per minute per day, it's pretty scary when you start looking at the figures. So
it's about a 1.5%
I don't want to take,
increase a year over the next 20 years.
Yes, it's scary. This is all smoke and mirrors. From my point of view, you guys really should be on the Penn and Tower Fool Us show, because I think you guys would win that award.
Next question here.
Good evening. Two questions, one for Hillary and one for Ms. Bishop.
What community are you from?
From Markland Wood, and I'm with Cass.
Okay. Great.
Happily. Ms. Bishop, who ultimately is responsible for noise at Pearson? That's a question for you. But hold it just before while I ask Hillary. Hillary, where the hell is Howard Eng? I ask that again because this is not a CENAC meeting, and the only reason you started to come was because I pointed out after the departure of Toby Lennox that I was unhappy with no vice president being there. We were spoiled by having that. And the reason why I'm so upset about Howard not being here, there is no way on this earth that you and the little coterie that might go into when Howard says, what happened last night? And you go in and you will express to him the seething, roiling rage that is really here. Okay? There's no way you can share that with him. And so for you to palm this off, and our colleague was absolutely right. This is not a CENAC meeting. There's a couple of the members sitting right up there. They're barely breathing. They got nothing to do here. They're just part of the audience. And that's ridiculous. Anyway, that's my comment on that. And I know if I ask, where the hell's Howard, you'll just palm it off with some, well, you know, he's got a flat foot on the left side or something. Anyway, Ms. Bishop, who ultimately is responsible for noise at Pearson?
I know that you're looking for that to be an easy answer.
Yes.
Noise is a shared responsibility across a lot of agencies. Transport Canada regulates aircraft noise at source at the aircraft itself. They provide guidance to municipalities on land use. We design flight paths. The airport authority is responsible for a noise program at the airport, including receiving, investigating, and responding to public complaints. It's a shared responsibility.
So when many are involved, none take responsibility, right?
I think we're all here today taking responsibility, and there's lots of work that's been undertaken. I know some of it hasn't happened as quickly as you would have liked, but we've all made commitments to come back in a substantive way and in a transparent fashion on the recommendations that have been made by third parties.
Ms. Bishop,
okay,
the guy
let's move
sitting
on.
beside you hasn't got a clue how many fines there were. He brought no information with him at all. And in him, at Transport Canada, we are supposed to be secure? No, thank you. Anyway, thank you.
We have time for 1 or 2 questions, depending on how brief they are. So let's go over to this person here. We're coming back to here. Over to here, please. Introduce yourself.
Check. Yeah. It's George, still from Alderwood. I'd like to kind of put to bed this whole runway alteration program that's being suggested, because give us some statistics on the hourly movements on any Saturday or Sunday between 7 a.m. and 11 p.m. And I think you're going to find it's over a single runway arrival, single runway departure operation, which is what you have in the 15 or 33 operation. So stop. You're going to save yourself a lot if you just put that thing right aside. Runway alteration, but you're not going to be involving the north-south runways in any of that kind of playing around on the weekends. Anybody have an answer to that? What's the hourly runway movements on the Saturday and Sunday between 7 a.m. and 11 p.m.?
Thanks for your question, George. So the hourly runway limits, we book 90 slots per hour. That's how many slots we book, and I recognize that's not your question. But certainly, depending on the weather, the runways going north-south can deliver anywhere from high 70s to low 80s per hour in good weather, and lower than that in bad weather.
Yeah, with that being a high percentage of arrivals, because you can arrive on 2 runways. You cannot depart on 2 runways in a north-south direction. And under the current procedures, although I have heard situations being talked about dueling on the north-south runways sometime in the future.
Okay, there wasn't really a question there, just a final comment. So last question of the night.
Thanks very much. My name is Ivan Baker, and I'm the Member of Provincial Parliament for Etobicoke Centre. So I will be brief. One is, I wanted to say that I've been involved with the GTAA on the issue of noise over the community that I represent since 2004, on and off. And during that period, I experienced very little commitment. I know you folks weren't at the table at the time, in fairness, but I experienced very little commitment or desire from the GTAA to address those noise impacts. And as a result of a number of other issues around communication, around consultation, around genuinely working in partnership with the community, I think communities have lost trust in the GTAA and its desire to serve not only its clients, who are the airlines, but actually consider the needs of the community. And so my suggestion to you is to rebuild that trust, that you, first of all, do what you say and say what you do, but also that you ensure that as you're working in partnership with the community, that mechanisms that you have to consult are ones that people can believe in. So CENAC is a good example. You've heard a lot of comments. I won't go into detail. People have concerns about CENAC. Let's fix CENAC, right? Let's start there. And let's demonstrate to the communities that surround the airport that this is a body that truly represents the community and advocates for the community, and then you can work in partnership with them. I think as a result of that, you're hearing a lot of comments about the need for greater oversight, and I agree with those comments, because the GTAA has not demonstrated its ability to be a responsible corporate citizen and to be concerned and genuinely act in the interests of communities. Corporate interests keep taking precedence over those community interests. So when I know that in government, when bodies are concerned about regulation or additional regulation, they demonstrate their ability to work with communities and work with those stakeholders, and I'd urge you to do that. But I do think that Transport Canada needs to take greater control and have better oversight over the GTAA. The second issue is on, specifically to the noise. Look, if I was in your shoes, or I used to be in management consulting, I used to advise my clients, the first thing I would do is I would start with those measures that have greatest impact with the least cost or the least negative impact to communities. Okay. Now your report here has a whole number of suggestions, and you have them on the back page of the handout that was handed out. There's a whole bunch of them here that are what I would call lower hanging fruit, right? So one of them is the one, Hillary, you talked about, right? Which is retrofitting the A320. That's great. I agree that should have been done a long time ago, but that's a good first step. I agree 5 years is too long, but it's a good first step. But there's a whole bunch of other ones here. Investigate low power, low drag operations, auxiliary power unit restrictions, voluntary nighttime ban on the use of reverse thrust, more stringent restrictions on the noisiest aircraft types, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. To me, this is low-hanging fruit. This is stuff that can be done, the impacts of which can be measured and tested, and then you can step back and look at what, if anything, needs to be done beyond that. To me, I think you should start there, and I think you should stop looking at some of the measures that are going to be deeply impactful to people's health, safety, to noise over their communities, to the quality of life that they enjoy, and to their property values. And I'm specifically concerned about the runway alternation option. I just don't think that makes any sense it doesn't make sense for operational reasons, it doesn't make sense for noise mitigation reasons, and you're already studying that, and you haven't tried the low-hanging fruit. Try the low-hanging fruit, work with the community, and then let's talk about what happens next. That would be my position. I've said, and somebody mentioned the hub, so I'll say it. You folks know this because I've spoken with you, Hillary, and the rest of the team a number of times. I'm a provincial politician. The province doesn't regulate the airport. But what the province is responsible for, in part, is transit in the GTA. And I've said it to you, to the folks of the GTAA, and I'll say it to all of you, that my position is that unless the GTA works effectively with the community, which I've yet to see, and if the GTA continues to consider runway alternation, I will fight against any provincial funding going to the transit hub and going to the GTA to expand. And so here's my question to you. This is a document from Transport Canada from about 1996, and I'm not going to read the whole thing. It's very brief. This is when the north-south runway was being constructed. And it said, airport management is proposing to use the new runway and has further committed that operations on the new runway will be limited to those periods when weather mandated, so in other words, strong crosswinds incapacitating use of the parallel east-west runways, or required due to other exceptional circumstances. Example, north-south runway out of service, disabled aircraft, etc. Historical wind data indicate that mandatory usage of north-south runways will be for approximately 5% of the time for arrivals from the south and 1% of the time for arrivals from the north. So my question to you is, when airport management made this commitment when that runway was being built, people made decisions about where they live, how they live, what homes they buy, etc. Will you, and so my question is, will you live up to this commitment? That's my question.
So Yvonne, a number of things. So we thank you for your encouraging words about pursuing the noise action plan and some of those low-hanging areas that we can pursue as soon as possible. We very much want to look at CENAC and get moving on our quieter fleet incentive program and addressing the A320. Hoping to be able to look at the night flight requirements and what we can do on that front as well, and come back in December with more details about all of that program. So thank you very much. If those are things that indicate to the community that we take this seriously, then I appreciate your support and your commitment to continuing to work with us to see those through. In terms of transit, you have to represent your community, Yvonne, and There are many people across the GTA who need transit, especially in communities around the airport area. I, for one, would not want to be standing in the way of the demand for transit in this province. Number one thing you hear about in terms of surveys and what people want from the provincial government is more transit, less congestion. I'm going to leave that with you. On that memo from Transport Canada, maybe Transport Canada wants to address it. We have always worked, demonstrated a willingness to operate to that 5% usage on the north-south in an effort to balance community concerns and our operations.
I'll let her respond.
That was a moment in time. It was before we took over operation of the airport. What we've said is that today there are other community concerns that have been raised and that we would study alternation. I know you folks don't like it. We've committed to studying it. There is a very significant impact to communities on the east and west ends of the runway. They've asked us to look at it. We're going to proceed with the study, release the technical results before the end of the year, and then consult in hopefully the first quarter of 2018. We haven't made a decision. We're going to consult. We have a commitment under the noise protocol that was a voluntary agreement between all airports, NAV Canada and Transport Canada, that we would consult on any significant changes to the runway usage that may create noise impacts. That's what we're doing.
Okay, we're at 7 minutes past 9.
I think you made yourself clear on that front. Yeah.
We're at 7 minutes past 9. I'll turn it over to Robin for concluding comments in adjournment. No, we're at 7 minutes past 9. Let's conclude.
We'll give the gentleman the final word, and then I'll close out the meeting.
Okay, I don't know if I'm the only one who sees this, but I see here, fun fact check, Toronto Pearson is choosing to grow at the expense of its neighbors. That's what it says here. The GTAA is bounded by an agreement with the federal government that requires the GTAA to prepare for and accommodate passenger demand. So passenger demand and people affected, too bad. Okay, so you are, is that what I'm seeing? Also, I'm seeing Toronto Pearson refuses to share air traffic with other Southern Ontario airports. You're doing the hard thing. You're putting 10 sardines in a 5 sardine can. Other sardine cans are half empty with lots of room. And apparently your hands are strapped. You're choosing, they're making you do what's the hardest thing of all, dividing neighbor against neighbor. Why are we restricted like this? This is crazy. I mean, it's right here, fact check. I don't know if I'm the only one who sees that. We need a new government.
We're growing in response to regional growth. We're growing in line with regional growth. The growth of the population of the GTA is going to increase by about 1.4%. That is for Transport Canada to decide and the federal government. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. I'll turn it over to... Can you stop the heckling, please? We'll just turn it over to Robin for the final comments. Can you stop the heckling? Let's just finish the meeting off.
Great, thank you. Thank you all.
Excuse me.
Thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining us tonight. I just want to conclude.
Can you stop heckling?
With regards to, can you repeat your question?
Response to building a second airport? Transport Canada?
Sorry, you wanted an answer about
build a second airport.
Transport Canada and its...
Lawsuits galore rising up when you can just build
Airports are, sorry, I don't want to put words in Transport Canada's.
Introduce yourself, please.
Joe Swalek, I'm from Transport Canada. I'm the Director for Civil Aviation. Your questions that you're asking are more of a political nature. We're a regulatory body here. We look after regulating. We work with the GTA. Greg Nichols, his boss, is here as well. And our issues manager's here. We're here, we're listening. So that's what I can tell you right now. But with regards to the answer you're asking for, I don't have an answer for you. So it's not my position to give you an answer like that. It's not my position to give you that. If you want a regulatory question, we can ask that. But with regards to, from a technical base, we'll be glad to answer that one.
At the expense of its neighbors. It's a done thing. We're wasting our time then. Because no matter what you do, you're going to get neighbor against neighbor, you're going to get all kinds of a fiasco going on. You're doing the hard thing. Why are you choosing to do that? Is it cost effectiveness? Profits before people? What is it?
Again, the role that we're playing is a regulatory body, not with regards to the political question. With the regulation. Hey, I can work with the regulations under the...
Let him respond, please. You can't hear the response if you're shutting him down.
So your question, I really can't answer you. Because it's more of a political that you're asking. So...
Okay, let's turn it back over to Robin to wrap up the meeting, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for your time and for staying over tonight. These are not easy meetings. These are very difficult, and these are very difficult conversations. And for some of our friends who have been here for many years, and residents and neighbors, they're going to be going on for a long time. And I want to thank you very much for your input and your guidance tonight. We have some really good recommendations here. We know that there's areas where we need to improve and there's opportunities to grow. And I hope that some of the things you heard tonight demonstrated that we're committed to moving those pieces forward. I do want to acknowledge that our CENAC committee was here, and all the resident members were here tonight. And yes, we do have difficulties with the schedule and fitting into a schedule that works for elected officials. But we heard that tonight as well, that best practices say that there's a lot of ways and room for improvement for how we run our noise committee, and that will be one of the things that we will do first. But I wanted to acknowledge that the committee members were here tonight, and also acknowledge that they have sat here and been at these meetings all these years, and they have been holding our feet to the fire. They have heard what you have been said, and they have been working with us to push us forward to get to a space where we even had tonight's recommendations. And so I want to take a moment to thank the committee and that they were here this evening, and so thank you very much. And we look forward to working with you to build out a committee that is representative of what this community expects. And that is just one of the measures that we will go forward from this noise management action plan. So on that note, this recording will be posted as well tomorrow. All the documents are live on the website, so you can see the full recommendation and research. And we look forward to seeing you at the December 6th meeting, where we will come back with our next 5-year action plan, and you can begin to see some short, mid, and long-term timelines around how we'll pursue some of these ideas. Thank you very much.